Welcome back to Bonded by Metal podcast with Andrew McKay Smith from Scars and Guitars podcast and YouTube channel and BaldHeaded Metal. And today we had an interesting topic. I posed Andrew a question. What bands do you think are underrated that deserve a lot more attention? And that just kind of became the inception point for this particular podcast. So we can talk about what we think is an underrated band or bands.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, well, to kick things off too, mate, we kind of said it during the last conversation, but Happy New Year. Here we are, 2022, and doesn't it still feel like 2019 in some ways?
It's especially in New York that it's just rising up again and everybody's sick, everybody's going through it again. What can you do?
Same here in Queensland. Yeah, same here. It's yeah, nothing we can do, mate. Is it? It's but we've always got the metal, we've always got the music, and I think you picked an excellent topic this time around because I've definitely got some firm views on some bands that are underrated. So yes, they're underrated, but there are reasons for them too. So I'm very curious to hear your selection.
Okay, so in that case, let me start it off today. I'll start it off with a thrash metal band. You probably heard this name already before. I've mentioned it before. Vector. I believe they're a United States band. They only have 3 albums. And they've kind of disappeared. They were gaining a lot of momentum in the late 2000s, but they've kind of disappeared off the map because their lead and frontman kind of the band, David DeSanto, had a case of where he assaulted his wife. It was a whole big issue. A lot of people kind of criticized him, jumped him. The band fell apart. There was a whole big thing going on. And I think for certain people, they just kind of refuse to listen to the band because of that, right? But as you know already, I'm like, this is what he's done. It looks like he paid for it, whatever it's been. He did his thing. I still want to highlight this band because the band is not just the front man. It's all the band members in the group who all write music and come up to, with this kind of thing together. Vector is a phenomenal blackened thrash band that kind of incorporated really some good elements of that black metal side, the speed of it with these kind of really crazy screeching vocals. But the songwriting on all 3 albums are absolutely phenomenal, especially my favorite album, the second one, Outer Isolation, always focusing on science fiction. For some reason, bands like in the 2000s, Warbringer, and I'm trying to think of other ones, Evil, all these kind of new wave thrash metal bands were really gaining traction. And Vector was always on the periphery because they were not as accessible. They were extremely fast, extremely aggressive and technical. They weren't heard of as many as some other bands. And they just, I don't know, for some reason, they just never picked up steam. And I wanted to highlight this band because despite the band's history, we have to be able to give a person a second chance. And I think it's a band worthy of a second chance. They have new material that they're writing for this band. It's a fantastic thrash metal. I like thrash metal. Any chance I have to highlight it, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, and look, from what I remember and recall, I think there were allegations, not necessarily police reports associated with what was going on with the singer.
I think later on, I think they actually were able. Yeah.
Well, I absolutely agree with you that everybody deserves a second chance. Plus, what goes on in someone's personal life, we simply don't know the context of things happening. I'm absolutely not advocating for domestic violence. Please, nobody take me out of context for that one there. But sometimes people don't know what is going on in another person's life. And I mean, look, if you were going to go right down the line in terms of cancelling musicians for being despicable people, John Lennon should be at the top of anybody's list. Look what he did to his son, Julian.
We talked about Manowar as well. He deserves it.
Yeah, to me, Manowar, I my views on Manowar. Can't touch them, bloody. And I was a fan. Still love Ross the Boss, but Manowar, the band, as it stands these days, won't go near them. There was no statement from the band in relation to Carl Logan's they're not allegations. He's been charged. So, I mean, the reality is, if we were going to go around and and look at the urban artists, rap artists, and all the rest of it. I mean, Jesus Christ, where do we start? So Vector, killer band, imperfect human being, but it's the music that we are here to focus on.
I think it's the nature of it, right? Nobody's perfect. It's cast the first stone, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. People want to be virtuous because they want to point out, it's just a pylon at some point. Again, he may have been charged, but we have no context. We don't know anything else except for what was reported. And I think, killer band. I agree with you. Actually, they're a band. Are they still on the boards these days? Are they still available?
They released a new single recently, which is absolutely fantastic. And it looks like the band is reuniting to release more material. So it's going to be interesting for me to check out. I'm a big fan. I've loved all three albums with intense, like just absolute intensity, because thrash metal is just my thing. And I'm just gonna, Gigi, you can come here. We're gonna have an extra, exactly. We're gonna have an extra person to the group here. But I'm gonna let you kind of kick it off with what you would like to. Come on. Or you would like to kind of
there we go, there's your cat. the big one for me that doesn't receive their due credit is Living Colour, New York City's finest. No band moves with the same groove as Living Colour. And you know, there's some other things in there apart from metal. I get that, but they are a metal fans band. Make no mistake. If you go to a gig, you're going to find the same people that you'd find at a thrash metal gig or what have you. I know that because they're very popular here in Australia, or they've experienced a resurgence here in Australia. Okay. And they've toured twice recently in 2017 and 18. And my God, the ferocious groove from that band is just unbelievable. I've spoken to 3 of the 4 members about some of the reasons, not really that they haven't experienced success. We didn't dive into them specifically, but I don't think there's any doubt whatsoever that the media has maybe in the past, I don't know how strong it is right now, but specifically about black musicians playing rock and metal. Okay.
And they were one of the first in terms of playing that really heavy metal sound before Suicidal Tendencies really picked up steam. I think they were really just killing it in the 80s.
Oh yeah, well, their first couple of albums, you know, with the big song "Cult of Personality," to me, that's the best rock song ever written. I mean, excuse my language, unfuckable. It's just got everything you could ever want from a great rock and metal tune. It's all there. It's to me, everybody cites, you know, Rage Against the Machine's "Killing in the Name of." I think "Cult of Personality" is the alpha and the omega when it comes to that. But Living Colour, having spoken to the guys, they're gentlemen. 3 of the guys that I've spoken to are gentlemen. I have addressed some of these issues around race with them. They are prepared to go there and have conversations about that. Anybody can have a listen to my podcast conversations, particularly with Vernon Reed, who was the fellow who kicked off the BRC, the Black Rock Coalition, to raise awareness around black rock and metal artists. Look, we'll say it here now, rock music is a black artifact. They invented it. Okay.
Yes.
And Will Calhoun, the drummer, we had a lengthy conversation about this. It's just crazy that there's this obfuscation. You would never say classical music was invented in Zimbabwe. So why are we saying rock music isn't a black artifact?
Okay. I had this big issue in school where one of my friends, I started introducing him to heavy metal, and one of his friends gives this comment. It's like, "Isn't that white boy music?" I looked at him. I'm like, you know, blues and jazz was created by black people, right? The string instrument and drums come from Africa, you fucking idiot. It's like know your history before you say something like that. The music shouldn't first also, another thing, music shouldn't be just to one person of one color, of one religion. It's for everybody. And it's important to recognize where it comes from as well. So I'm with you on board 100%.
Yeah. So that's my feelings about Living Colour. And all those issues aside, as a musician, just the quality of the musicianship, it's just still inspiring. To this day, I'm a musician, I'm playing on stage, and you get into the groove and get into the zone. I often think, what would Doug Wimbish do here? You know,
they're not around anymore, right? They don't have any active like new albums.
They released they had my album of the year in 2017. Nice. So they're still going. As I say, I think in certain territories, like here in Australia, they're big. Don't know about parts of the States how big they are. I think they're sort of fallen into that musicians band territory, as a few of the bands on my list have fallen into. That's not a bad thing, but I do think that they're far worthier of certainly things like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah. And they paved the way for a lot of people. They showed it was possible to do.
Yeah, I think so, mate. Yeah, so that's that'd be my number 1 underrated band ever, I reckon.
You know, I'm gonna hit you with another thrash metal band. I couldn't resist, and it's also from that late 2000s era. This time around, it's another United States band from Colorado, Havoc. I
I see.
absolutely love Havoc. I mean, every album they released, Burn, Time Is Up, I Natural Selections, Conform Aside blew like my head off completely. They have an album from 2020 V. This band, I believe, is a it's a thinking man's band because they're technical. They have Megadeth and Metallica, Slayer influences. I mean, at some points, even it sounds like Dave Mustaine. There's I think in Unnatural Selections. I think it's an absolutely fantastic thrash metal band. I just think in general, thrash doesn't get the attention it deserves because some of the most technical albums I think ever written are thrash records. Some of the most aggressive, I mean, look at my shirt. Some of the most aggressive albums ever written are thrash records. And they paved the way for things like death metal. They've like black metal. They've opened the floodgates of how aggressive a music can be, how technical music could be. It showed people that guitarists were just on a completely different level. I mean, rust in peace. Look at that. And I think Havoc, out of the new age bands, along with Vector, they really deserve attention. Don't get me wrong. I like Warbringer. I like all these other bands. I think they're fun, but they lack a new age sound. They just try to go to the past and try to pull from the past, and that's all they do, and go on a nostalgia trip. And me not being a nostalgic person, I want nostalgia, but show me something new. And Havoc does that
Yeah.
so well. It brought it to the new age. It introduced all the advances that have happened in metal music, in my opinion. And they showed how it could be done in today's age that's fresh and powerful at the same time.
What are your views and thoughts on Voivod?
You know, I am not a fan of Voivod. And it's not because it's bad. It's like Tool for the person who's not ready for it. It's like, what am I listening to right now?
Yeah.
And especially in the recent kind of projects where they've shied away from the more thrashy sound into like whatever they're doing now, where it's completely like it confuses me, it confuses my whole body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Yeah. I can't remember the name of who was his name? Eves something or another. Anyway, so the drummer. I've had a conversation with him, but yeah, there are so many underrated thrash bands out there that just don't seem to achieve broader recognition for their contribution to moving the genre forward, if you like, and contributing different elements. And I think you brought up two very worthy bands there. So for mine, the next band is sort of in a similar vein. There's four of my bands out of the five, they fall under a similar banner. So the next one for me, again, isn't necessarily strictly a metal band, but appeals to metal fans. And I've mentioned them on episodes past. King's X. Now, King's X have, again, a ferocious groove. Their album Dogman from 1993 to me is it's, if not my favorite album ever written, it's up there. It's very hard for me to pick a number one, but it certainly is up there. But Doug Pinnick, again, African American guy, talked about how when they appeared at the 1994 edition of Woodstock, and the band themselves received tremendous support from other bands that were big in the grunge era. Pearl Jam and Soundgarden, I think, were very big proponents of them. Took them out on tour. Pearl Jam certainly did, but talked about how they had a magnificent appearance at Woodstock, but there was no sales bump afterwards, which is really unusual in the MTV era. So it was like, and Doug was very, he said that because he had these massive dreadlocks and the like, and he talked about how he went home after that, in the aftermath of that, cut all his dreadlocks off, threw out all of his rock clothes, said, fuck it, I'm done. You know, it was like as if there was this perception that he felt as though that there was this perception that he shouldn't have been up there. I think he's well beyond that now. He's an icon these days. Doug Pinnick, just a magnificent bass player and a tremendous vocalist. And the thing about Doug that I found was, as a young fella, it was really strange for me at one level, not so strange at another level, but his lyrics, it was like they were singing to my soul. You know, here's this young fella from Australia, and here's this black American who seems like as though he's reading my soul's thoughts through his lyrics. And, you know, you're young. I went through a boarding school, I think, as I mentioned. You feel a bit socially ostracized and a bit isolated, this sort of thing. And this guy's lyrics just cut straight to the heart of the matter, if you like. So King's X do it for me on so many levels. Ty Tabor is just one of the... Ty Tabor, to give you an idea how good he is, Dimebag listed him as a significant inspiration. Okay. So you can
So that's
hear,
big praise.
yeah, you can hear early King's X albums, Out of the Silent Planet, and you can hear the tone that Ty Tabor was using there. You can hear how in later Pantera records, when they became the Pantera we all know and dearly love and miss, you can hear how Dime adopted characteristics of his tone there. And I think that's one of the reasons why King's X make my list as one of the most underrated bands ever.
Yeah, it's a shame, and there's so many bands that failed because they never got that steam that were deserved all the talent in the world. And I'm actually going to your home country for this next one because I feel like Australia is actually, unfortunately, maybe on your fingers you can really count those, like Mortal Sin and
Sure.
various other kind of bands. And I want to give a shout out to an Aussie band, Bellacor, which I only discovered this year, and I couldn't believe I only discovered them this year because they're just so intelligent. The music is emotional. It's extremely well written. You can tell they're classically trained, but they don't lose their soul. It's just they found the perfect blend of elements to create this melodic death metal sound that I think is inspired by the Gothenburg sound and inspired by the Swedish and Finnish bands and everything, but it does its own thing. And nobody sounds like Bellacor. And the way they transition, I think the reason I want to highlight this band so much, and again, in every place that I can, especially thanks to all the reactors, the comments like down below who gave me this kind of inspiration to check this band out, is how smoothly they transition. Their songs are melodies. To me, they're symphonies, much less just a regular song. A lot of times when you hear some of our favorite songs, you can tell they stitch riffs or melodies together to make it sound cool and make it sound like it jives together. Whenever I listen to Bellacor, any song, like I said, it feels like a smooth melody. It was always meant to be this way. And the way they interject the piano into their music and make it a main instrument, not some side thing that you hear somewhere in the background, like you would in Nightwish, for example, that kind of just enhances the environment. It's a main instrument within the band overall. And especially their latest album, Coherence, which I said is their best work yet. It's a band they're reaching their pinnacle and they're reaching their highest potential. And I feel that's the time that people should be paying attention to them. Imagine if Megadeth never got the eyes that they got during Rust in Peace or Peace Sells But Who's Buying. Nobody will remember them. They'll be forgotten. And it's very important to give the attention to these bands when they're at their hottest, because when they're at their lowest, it's not the same thing. And everybody's going to have this up and down. And I think Bellacor is a young band that absolutely needs more eyes on them.
Thanks for flying the flag for Aussie metal too. I know you've done that a few times, and Bellacor in particular, killer band. At the moment, we are living through some kind of I don't like using the words like resurgence or renaissance, but there are so many killer Aussie metal bands. The Amenta is another one that I think doesn't get enough attention either, and they're world class, genuinely world class, a bit like what you're saying with Bellacor. Beleth is another. Kimura from out west in Perth, Western Australia. I mean, the list could continue. I think the other issue that some Aussie bands face is that it's very hard to cut through and compete with the scene in North America and in Europe.
Yeah.
Meaning that, like, you got almost over 300 million people in the States. There's
like 350.
350. So what percentage of them are metal fans? Which means that there's something like 20 or 30 million active metal fans. You know what I'm saying? In the States, in Australia, that number is just so tiny. If I go to a local show, there's 80 people less, and that's a big show.
Wow.
And it's just the scale of things. It's just nowhere near here what it is where you are, or in North America, in Europe, sorry, where you can tour. You go sort of half an hour this way, and you're in a different country. You go half an hour this way, where I am, you're still in the same bloody suburb. So yes, we live in an era where the internet has broken down just about every barrier you can imagine, but there are still some barriers that need to be overcome. We've talked about this, I think, before, where we said metal is the playing live is like our virtual fire pit. You know what I mean? It's going back to our roots. It's how we feel sort of centered in some ways. Bands need to play live, and Bellacor probably haven't been able to play live since probably 2019 or something.
And actually, another issue that Sam, their keyboardist and a piano player, said is it's very expensive for an unknown band to go to Europe or United States. It requires a lot of funds, a lot of time away from work. There's not a lot of places and venues to go, to give concerts in Australia. So they really have to create a whole tour set list for him to make it even make sense to go on tour, which is not the case for a European band. It's like grab your passport and fucking go to a different country right away, and it's that easy. Or United States, where there's just so many venues and so many fans. It's difficult on multiple fronts for them, not just being unknown, but it's also just the difficulty of even promoting themselves.
Yeah, I think so. And that's why when people with a keen ear like you pick up on a band like that, it's really important for them. And I'm sure that they appreciate it, man. So yeah, killer job there. And I'll move to my number 3, third on my list at the very least anyway, the funk metal Overlords from your hometown, brother, 24/7 Spies. Again, the black guys playing music that it's heavy metal, but it's got great funk bass in it. And they were a band that had some killer hits back in the day. They did a cover of, I never listened to, it's not my favorite song from them, I've got to say, but it was a cover of the Kool and the Gang song, Get Down, Get Down.
Yeah.
Whatever that song's called, sorry. But they had that back in the day. People can check out that video. But overall, a bit like Living Colour, they just have this ferocious groove. Jimmy Hazel, their singer and guitarist, and Rick Scattori, their bassist. I've had a few limited interactions with them online too. I've been trying to get them to come on the podcast. I haven't hit them up recently though. Eventually I think I'll get them on, but they're a band that hardly anybody's ever heard of, but I got into them back in the day and I've just kept the faith and kept the love going. And it's because I'm a bassist, I think I love what those guys do, because they're the most overt funk metal band. If funk metal had a if funk metal was in a magazine and you were looking for a band to put on the cover, you'd put 24/7 Spies on the cover.
And it's a testament to the fact that they need to be known more. I've never heard of them, and I'm here. I'm from New York. Never heard of them. I can't believe it.
Yeah, check them out. Seriously, like they're a lot of soul. They call themselves heavy metal soul, I should point out. The funk metal thing was more of a media label, but as far as I'm concerned, it fits because it's very funky metal, and it's stuff that I listened to when I was younger, and when YouTube first started emerging. We'd go to our mates' places, and we're all musicians, right? And so we'd all take turns putting on some songs on YouTube, and I'd almost always just pick the 24/7 Spies tunes. And there are a few people like, I've never heard this band, but wow, don't they sound fantastic? So I hope they're still active. They're still touring, still playing. I hope that by me mentioning it here, it inspires at least a few people to go out there and check out this stuff because it's worthy.
And you know what it is too? I want to move into a band here that it kind of relates to an idea of completely being unknown. And this time around, it definitely has to do with geography. This band, Malakesh, comes from Israel. And Israel is not known for heavy metal. It's not even known for rock music. It's mostly pop, techno, that kind of very popular genre music. Just metal and rock doesn't do very well there. And to have an Assyrian, Mesopotamian, melodic black metal with thrash elements is like unheard of to ever make it there. And I got a chance to actually talk to the frontman of the band, Ashmendi, who's been at the helm since 90s, when the beginning of black metal. He's been at it. But I think why this band, and again, this is a band I've mentioned in every chance that I had, I have mentioned this band. It's because he took the black metal, we know what that is. It's a familiar sound. Let's build on it. And he took Mesopotamian, Assyrian folk music and started in mixing it with black metal, creating these melodies on electric shimtars or just electric guitars. And every single album, you hear this progression towards folk more and more and more, where it sounds like absolutely nobody else. There's not one band, and I say this confidently, there's not one band that sounds like Malakesh. There's been a couple like Mirath, which is more power metal, which have incorporated some Middle Eastern tunes in there. But to have such a deep knowledge of the culture, to have a deep knowledge where he literally studied. He's like, at first, when he first began, he studied scrolls and notes of old Assyrian Mesopotamian music, whatever was available, to create some of these melodies. And they're just such a phenomenal band. Like I said, their albums Enki, Emissarius, and the Epigenesis are some of the most listened to albums I've had since the beginning of me really getting into heavy metal. I've just must have listened to like 30 or 40 times each one nonstop. I'm gonna I would recommend this band. I've been so eager to see them live. They don't even tour for the most part. They only tour in Europe, the only place it makes sense for them. So much so the frontman of the band actually moved to Europe at one point because that's the only thing that made sense for him to really have the band grow. Because in Israel, it was dead. And I think that's an important point to point out here is geography has a lot to do with your success. How many bands from China, India, they'll never see the light of day because of their, whether it be governments, the country in general, what's popular in the country. And it's up to us fans to really have to support them and demand for them to come, for them to make sense and at the same time grow and expand. I feel like Malakesh should be at the top of everybody's charts when you talk about black metal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, they're a band that comes from the Middle East's only functioning democracy. And so they've got opportunity, there's no doubt about that. But is there an audience a bit like here in Australia that will support them? Okay. And the answer is probably not. Okay. So that's the reason why you say the front man has had to go to Europe in order to foster and forge a career over there. But yeah, that ancient Middle Eastern, let's just call it, the cradle of civilization, if you like, and a lot of the music that taps into the lore associated with that, very popular. I haven't checked them out to the extent that you certainly have. I'm certainly aware of them and I've heard some of their stuff, but that stuff I find fascinating just from a lyrical perspective, and that academic side of it that you talk about there too, I think is so important because, metal is looked at, certainly not by us. It's a bit of an antiquated thing, I know, but some people sort of look at metal as the meathead genre, and then you get a band like this and you just say, okay, listen to this. And it's far more advanced than your average rock, I wouldn't say rock, but urban or pop artist.
Yeah.
And what they're trying to achieve. So yeah, another killer selection there. And my next one is Fishbone. Have you heard of Fishbone?
Man, you coming out with some deep stuff here. No, I've never heard of it.
Yeah, a band when I was a young fella that were quite popular and inspired No Doubt. So I know for people are going to say, what's No Doubt got to do with heavy metal and therefore why are they being spoken about in the metal program? But look, again, they're a band that blends a number of different things, Fishbone. They're all black guys again, and talking ska, reggae, thrash, rock, but their appeal is really to the heavy metal and the rock fan. Okay. And why is that? Because I'm a heavy metal and a rock fan and I love the band, always have. Their album from 1993 really changed my universe. Give a monkey a brain and he'll swear he's the center of the universe. Has some of, and this will appeal to you, my friend, has some of the heaviest thrash I could recommend to anybody.
Oh, okay? So yes, I now have to add, was it 23 Spires and Fishbone?
24/7 Spires and Fishbone. There's a couple of songs, Servitude by Fishbone, and Swim, and what was the other song more toward the end of the album anyway? Have a listen to Give a Monkey a Brain and he'll swear he's the center of the universe. Even if you're not a fan of the reggae cuts that they put on there and some of the more ska stuff, they've got some brutal thrash on there, and they were signed to a major label.
I do like when bands take these kind of elements that seem that they shouldn't be mixing, like the Middle Eastern influence, like reggae, funk, I think is a direct translation. It fits very well. But they'll take these elements, folk music, and how do I find a way to squeeze it together and create something that's new and interesting? It sounds fresh. I love when bands do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I don't know if you ever heard. Actually, I didn't think about this. I don't know if you ever heard of the band Tankar Cavalry.
No.
It's Mongolian throat singing with heavy metal.
Oh, is that like the Who?
The Who? That's before them. This guy organized his band before them. He's from New York, but he has Mongolian heritage. He went to a really prestigious school for music. Unfortunately, the band's not around because he ended up passing away very young, very suddenly. They didn't know exactly what happened. He had some health issues. But what he was able to achieve within 3 or 4 albums, I think became the inspiration for bands like The Who, Cannibal Corpse, and a lot of as well as others as well to kind of come on board. But I think especially Mongolian throat singing already sounds metal. You don't even need music to it. It already sounds pretty metal.
The Who's a lot like that. Yeah, I'll have to check out the band you just mentioned. But yeah, the Who, Chris Marek, one of the promoters here in Australia, sent me through quite a few of their stuff last year and the year before, and I got to say I got into it. It was they were playing the throat singing, I think it was, and also traditional. They were using traditional Mongolian instruments only. So they might have had a drummer, I think, but everything else I think was there. I couldn't even tell you what the name of the instruments are.
Yeah, traditional instruments, yeah.
Traditional instrumentation, and it was heavy, dude. It was not heavy in the way that we might appreciate it from Deicide or Cannibal Corpse, but it was still heavy music. But you carried the same weight, the same emotion, you know.
I want to give a little shout out here. You mentioned Cannibal Corpse, and I went based on your recommendation, checked out their new album literally yesterday. I was fucking killer, man.
Well, you will dive down a very deep pit with them, let me tell you, because they're an outstanding. I mean, they really are death metal's house band in so many ways. You know, they are the death metal fans' death metal band.
I thought I had to mention. I have to give you a shout out whenever you introduce me to something interesting. I have to give you a shout out, man.
Oh, sweet. I'm glad that worked. Yeah, and Eric Rutan from Morbid Angel, Hate Eternal, Alas, a few other bands. He's in the group these days. He's been producing the band, and Eric Rutan is the death metal master blaster. The death metal house band now has its death metal master blaster. I think it's so strange because when I was a kid, I often thought, how long can these guys keep on doing it? So when I was a kid, I was in my teens. When I say I'm a kid, in my teens, these guys would only have been in their 20s. They're now in their late 40s and early 50s. And they're still playing brutal death metal. Father Time is
brutal as ever.
Yeah, heavier than ever. You're right. It's like, what's going to stop these guys? I think it's just Father Time.
Yeah. And you know what? I thought it was a nice transition. We started talking about death metal, and I'm going to do another plug here for a band that I've mentioned quite a lot, and it's Bolt Thrower. Bolt Thrower is my favorite death metal band of all time. And it's not because they're the most technical, because they're not. They have an extremely unique sound that I think many bands try to copy. And there have been bands that try to copy their sound to somewhat of the same success, but their album, they don't have a bad album. That's first of all. Their whole discography is legendary, right up until the point the drummer passed away, and they disbanded the band, and Carl Willis ended up doing the Memoriam band, which is like a poor man's Bolt Thrower, in my opinion.
Really? Okay, there you go.
That's what I think of them. It's just not the same. I don't like the songwriting. It's just the combination of the people from Bolt Thrower when they were there is what made the band special. And the whole sound of all of their albums. First of all, it's a band that first, when they began as picking up steam, they were the top selling band on, I believe it was Eric, the record label. They were the top selling death metal band on their record, the top selling band, I think, of all on that particular record. They were really picking up steam, but they kept getting fucked over by labels. They kept getting, they weren't given their due diligence in terms of money, in terms of fame. They were always kind of getting the shit end of the stick with this band. And it's been a kind of unknown element with this particular band that they've never gotten what they really deserved. And the band ended up splitting. The drummer ended up dying. Joe Bench, one of the most kick-ass bass players, a female that, in a death metal band, she was absolutely badass. Everything about this band, I think it's also an immediate thing. When you listen to it, you'll hear things like Amon Amarth's, I believe, Amon Amarth's sound in some ways influenced from this band. A band like Asphyx, Jungle Rot, clear inspirations from this band. Yeah. And I think Bolt Thrower is the top 10, one of the top 10 death metal bands that should be in the conversation. Every single person, when they talk about death metal, I think Bolt Thrower should be at one of the top of the list, if not the top of the list, and always will be my favorite death metal band.
I agree. I can't understand why people who consider themselves extreme metal and death metal fans haven't listened to Bolt Thrower. Fourth Crusade, holy shit. I remember when that stuff came out, and I remember the impact it had on me. This will sound, because it was 1991 or 1992 or whatever, I remember listening to them on the radio, late night metal radio here in Australia, and nothing had sounded as heavy as that. Okay.
That particular sound, right, that they created with the tuning.
Yeah. And Carl Willits, just with that raw that he's got, and I've had 3 or 4 conversations with Carl Love Carl. He's just one of the just a gentleman of a guy, and just a great extreme metal front man. And my daughter's even spoken to him. She wanted to have a chat to him, and he obliged there. He's just a fantastic fella. But anyway, yeah, you're right. From the ashes of Bolt Thrower rose Memoriam. I've got to say, I'm quite a fan of Scotty Fairfax, the guitarist in Memoriam, because he's across a few things. He did the solos on the Massacre album.
On the Massacre, yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
could. I think they have 2 albums at this point, right? 2 or 3 albums.
Yeah.
It's not. You know what? It's the whole time I'm listening to it. It sounds like they're trying to recapture the magic of Bolt Thrower, and it's just not. It's not the same. And perhaps maybe when I can let go of that idea that it's not Bolt Thrower and give it a chance as a new band, perhaps I'll come back to it with new eyes. But as of now, every time I'm listening to it, I just hear this lesser version of, and it's not, like I'm not trying to somehow put Carl down or put the guitars down in any kind of way. It's more of, as a fan, there's something holding on. It's like maybe they'll reunite, maybe there'll be a different lineup, something. And I know I have to let go of that at some point.
Well, Andy Whale, who'd been in and out of Bolt Thrower as well, he's the drummer in Memoriam. So they could easily get together, but I do think there's been a very, very significant split in the Bolt Thrower camp, with Andy Whale and Carl at one side, and the guitarist from Bolt Thrower, whose name I can't recall, and Joe Bench going off in the other direction there. And even Dave Ingram's around these days. He's back in Benediction, and Carl had been in and out of Bolt Thrower as well. And Dave Ingram, who he was in Benediction. Gosh, the very sort of circular scene in the UK, because even Barney Greenway was in Benediction there from Napalm Death for a while there too, way back in the early days. So, but the Godfathers of British Grind, I think that whole scene, isn't it? Just a magnificent scene. Benediction, Napalm Death, Carcass, Bolt Thrower, Extreme Noise Terror. I could go on. So many killer bands that I remember from my youth that I think they just never went away.
They never went away.
Just never went away. These bands, Carcass, I know, disbanded and sort of and came back, but Napalm Death kept on going. A lot of those other bands have sort of they've always had a presence. You've always been able to sort of find their music fairly easily, particularly in the streaming epoch.
And what I think it's rare too is their career has ended as Bolt Thrower. That band is done. So some people might ask the question, why go back to this band? I can just discover some new band that's keep going. I think it's one of the rare instances, and you could agree or disagree with me, they do not have a bad album. And with each album, it's arguably you can say they've only gotten better. I remember even Bolt Thrower during an interview, they asked him, when are you going to retire? He's like, when we create the perfect album, I think we'll retire. And then they released Those Once Loyal in, what was it, 2000, I think, 1 or 2006. So. It was
mid 2000s, yeah. But yeah,
their not only their best album, it was it just complete. And when I listened to this, I'm like, I've never heard anything like this. It was. I remember the last 3 albums they released: Honor, Valor, Pride, Those Once Loyal, and I believe it was For Victory.
Yeah.
Each one of those albums on every critical reception, 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10, no question about it. 10 out of 10. It was just on a different level. It was a band that ended being on fire, completely on fire. And to discover this kind of a discography for a fan who loves death metal, you're in for a surprise. They might not be going on forever, but what you'll discover here is a treasure trove, I believe.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with all your sentiments, brother. I do. They're one of those bands that I think, we're very lucky in some ways that we appreciate this music, because there are bands like Bolt Thrower in there, and they're enriching to the soul. You get bands like them. As I say, Fourth Crusade was the one that really hit me here. And that was the album. It was like, wow, does it get better than this? I mean, I still remember the feelings that I had back in the day, 30 years ago. Gosh almighty, 30 years ago now, when I was a young fella listening to them late at night, and the feelings that I had, they made you feel powerful.
Yeah,
they made you feel strong.
And the strong war lyrics that they would have in each album. Not to mention, for all my nerds out there, War Master. It's based on what was it? Warhammer. So for all my fans of Warhammer, they showed their nerdy side too.
That they do, yeah, that they do. And I'm going to round out my list with a death metal band I've mentioned them before, but this band here truly are carrying the torch forward. Blood Incantation. Hidden History of the Human Race, that album from 2019, was it? Yeah, it was 2019, I think it was. That really changed my perspective on what modern death metal could feel and sound like, I've got to say. That was how important that band was. For some reasons that I choose not to try to understand, they cop a lot of hate from the metal scene. They've got reaction videos on YouTube where they've got this one guy in particular that's just got a half-an-hour video where he's just taking out the band, saying why they're shit, saying why they're derivative. They're not. I'm a musician. Listen, I deconstruct music when I listen to it. These guys are distilling the essence of what the great Chuck Schuldiner and Trey Zagtoth from Morbid Angel did. Trey continues to do. They've distilled the essence, reimagined it, okay, in their own way. And Morris, I've spoken to Morris Kolontrowski from the group. I've got some insight into what makes those guys tick. They're from Colorado, the state of Colorado there. So they're a bit different. They're not from East Coast or West Coast. So they're not really drawing from a lot of inspiration, common inspiration, cliched inspiration even. Yeah. These guys have got their own thing going on. And the thing that I love about them, check out their live videos. They are deadly serious. You know that. And if you're in the mood for something, if you just don't want any fucking around, you just want to get to the heart of the matter and you love death metal, there is no band better than Blood Incantation, in my view.
And I'll tell you one thing, I want to check. I already put them on my list to check out because once you told me death metal, this amazing band, I was going to check them out. But if somebody I also say is that visceral in their response to the band, it's probably a good thing because he might not react to it very well or might not even understand what he's listening to. I've had those moments myself. It's like I'm not going to speak highly, like, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. We've all had those moments where we just, what the fuck is this? And then a month or two later, it's like, I cannot believe I even said those words. And that will be the greatest feeling ever. And when you said reimagined, that's the word I've kind of latched onto. It's a word that you have to be very wary of doing in a lot of heavy metal's mindset because they don't know how to change. They don't know how to hear something that's not what they've been hearing before. And being able to adapt to something new, like, how do you praise the past but pave a way forward with something new? It's a very difficult task. You're not going to have everyone on board.
No, agreed. And you know how big a fan I am of new sounds and bands that are coming out now.
Yeah.
Okay, so for the sake of the exercise, okay, 4 of my 5 bands are more legacy acts, but that's because they do have a history and they are underrated, and I do feel like they didn't get their due, and I think unfortunately Blood Incantation are going to fall into that category moving forward. But there's a hardcore listenership, people like me there who are lifelong fans of death and extreme metal, who recognize what they're doing and appreciate them for them and are going to support them for it. These guys, yeah, they truly. They mix in some ambient material as well. I think I've spoken about how much I appreciate the effort that they go to in their music videos too. I don't think they even do those bloody awful lyric videos. They do proper music videos, hire a production company. Mm-hmm. And the band isn't even, apart from what I like about their music videos, particularly, I can't remember it's the top rated music video from them on YouTube, so anybody can find it. But it's just like you're going through some interstellar dimension. It's like an LSD trip via extreme metal, and it's an Australian guy. Actually, they hired an Australian guy to do it for them, and just so many aspects of what Blood Incantation are doing. I think is important. I think their new album. I haven't heard anything from it coming out now, but the album is coming out. I haven't heard any of the new material, but I can only imagine, based on their past, they're not going to do any weird right angles and come out with something like a Cryptopsy did a few years back or whatever it was, where it's sort of like a left of center album. I don't think they've got that in them. These guys are, the die from which they're cast from means that the music that we understand that they've been playing to date, they're just going to keep on building on that, and long may they continue to do that.
And you know what I want? I want to open up the roadway actually to anybody who's watching this video. I would love to hear their top 5 list of what they think is the most kind of underrated. I'll even open it up, rock and metal bands. What do you think? Because we listed 5, but I'm sure you could have easily listed 30. There's just so many different bands that for some reason, Metallica gets and I don't mean to pick on Metallica, but Metallica got picked up and got the attention. Another band doesn't. Iron Maiden made it through every possible gateway that they could have hit. They somehow made it through. Another band didn't and just died. Or a band because of a documentary. Remember Anvil? When the documentary came out, they blew up. A band that was disappeared from the radar. You never know what's going to be that thing that will make you or break you. And I think the bands that we love with all our hearts, if it's not with your dollar, then at the very least spread the word. If you can't spread the word, then go to a concert, buy a t-shirt, do something to help these guys, get them motivated to keep going forward, because people don't realize a lot of these guys, it's not a full-time job for them. They have full-time jobs while they're touring, while they're making albums, while they're trying to do all this thing, rearranging their bandmates. There's just so much going on. Everybody thinks it's some magical thing, like you're a full-time musician. It's a very difficult road to travel.
Very, very difficult road to travel. Yeah, and that Anvil, that point you make about Lipskudlow and the guys in Anvil is such a great one. Yeah, because this is a band that inspired Metallica.
Yeah.
And yeah, the movie was a bit of a gimmick, but I hope the guys, and I've spoken to Lips about it, as I say, but I hope the guys made some money from it, and it did raise the profile enough. It certainly raised their profile enough for them to tour Australia finally. So
yeah.
they might have played to 100 people or what have you, but still there was an audience here for them to play to. But there's another classically underrated band, another Aussie band that inspired almost part of, maybe not the entire Swedish and Gothenburg scene, but certainly were given a big tip of the hat by Out the Gates, was Slaughterlord, a band from Sydney. And there are so many of these hidden gems, underground gems. Another one, Sadistic Execution, you've probably heard of. There's a band that inspired the entire Norwegian black metal scene just because they were crazy. They're doing stuff that sounds like like what Mayhem ended up sounding like. The more extreme aspects of it, the non-melodic aspects of it, back in the early 80s. There's videos out there of these guys doing it. Hey, we've talked about the Brazilian scene, Sarcophago and Volcano, all these bands that were playing extreme metal when extreme metal wasn't even a term. If you said it to somebody, they'd understand what the hell you were talking about. Max Cavalera in the early days of Sepultura as well. They never quite get the credit that I think that they're owed for fostering the genre. And look, my book is going to be coming out soon. I talk about some of these things in the book, but I think that for us it's easy because we love the music so much. It's easy for us to dive into the nuances and to be students of the genre and to foster it by understanding and then explaining and socializing some of these ideas in this platform that we've got here. But a bit like what you just mentioned, I encourage anybody who's listening and watching, hit us up in the comments. Tell us, which bands do you think are underrated, but why do you think they're underrated? Okay.
Yeah.
Why do you think you might like them, that's personal preference, but why do you think a band that you enjoy, that's a big part of your listening experience as a metal fan, isn't appreciated? We'd love to hear from you.
And on that note, guys, I think it's a perfect place also to kind of finish up our podcast. You have any closing statements? Because I think I've made my case for the bands that I love.
Yeah, same. No, I think we've done a good job on this one here. Look, you could talk for hours and hours about bands.
100%.
Like, there's a whole thing, just as the last point I'll make, metal in general doesn't get its due from the mainstream. Okay. Iron Maiden and Metallica support entire industries, just how big they are. Okay. Yet Metallica is certainly in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I don't care about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but I'm just using it to make the point.
Yeah, to make a point, yeah.
Yeah, Iron Maiden aren't. Yeah.
And the thing about Iron Maiden, I love this. During the concert on Madison Square Garden, Bruce Dickinson took time to explain something. He goes like, guys, when we weren't being played on the radio, because they refused to put us on the radio, they denied us to be played at Madison Square Garden, even though we had the fan base. They tried to kind of block us at every path. Who made us get to this point is you guys, the fans. We're here because of fans. We're not here because of some fucking radio show or somebody else that deemed us not worthy enough. And I loved that speech because I think he only united fans even more. He even said one of the greatest things I've ever heard about any performer. He goes like, your job as a frontman is to make this big crowd feel the size of your thumb. So they feel like as one unit. They're one thing together, united in this thing that we all love. And he's so good at doing that. Whether you love or hate Iron Maiden, they've always been the flag of heavy metal. One of the flags, always.
Yes, indeed, mate. Yeah. Great conversation, brother. Another good one.